What's going on, everyone? I just wanted to start this video with a huge thank you for the support. I appreciate you guys tuning in to view my content, hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and interacting in the comments. It's really helping the channel grow recently, and I just wanted to say how much I really appreciate it, and hopefully I can keep pushing out content that you guys enjoy. This session was played at Champions in Houston, Texas. Pretty much exclusively play at Champions now. We're playing there every Tuesday and Friday, and there's a stream every Wednesday. We're trying to push for more games throughout the week as well, and their room is definitely growing. If you guys are ever in the Houston area, I definitely recommend you check it out, and let me know if you're ever in town, and I'll get you guys a seat at the table. This session was from a couple months ago, and we were playing 5-10, and I hope that you enjoy it. Thanks. Start off the session by flatting pocket twos in middle position versus Salim's $30 open from early position. Typically, I'm going to be folding a lot of these smaller pocket pairs in early and middle position, but I think in a lot of live games where you're going to see a lot of multi-way flops, especially when stacks are deep, these hands make fine calls. I also don't expect this particular table to be 3-betting me too often. The one player that would be 3-betting me aggressively is Salim, and I think that he does have a slightly wider range here, so I think my flat is perfectly fine. We pick up one more call by the lawyer on the button, and we go 3 ways to a flop with the pot at $100. The flop is the 3 of diamonds, 5 of clubs, 4 of hearts, giving me the open ender with my small pocket pair. Generally, this is going to be a board that is very favorable to myself and the button. I think it's unlikely that Salim has too many of the smaller pocket pairs, although he does have a lot of the overpairs. I think it's also more likely that I have some of the 2 pairs and straights in this configuration. Because of that, I think that he decides to check here. And I think my hand in particular has a lot of value just from denial here. So I think I want to just fold out a lot of the overcards. Obviously, I can still make the best hand with a straight. I might have the best hand now with my pocket pair, or possibly hitting something like a set, although a lot of straights get there with my opponents having ace-x combos. I think small and large sizes are fine. Generally, I'm going to be betting a little bit on the larger size when I'm float betting, and I think that I have quite a large nut advantage. The player on the button folds, and Salim makes the call. I think a lot of Salim's range here when he calls is stronger pocket pairs than mine. He is going to have some hands like ace-5, ace-4 that will also have a stronger pair than me, but have a little bit of additional equity. Outside of that, I do think that he continues here with some of his stronger ace-x combos, something like ace-king, ace-queen, and a lot of his ace-x combos that have the backdoor flush draw, as they already have the gut shot in the overcard. We go to the turn with the pot at $250. The turn is the 3 of spades, a pretty good card for my overall range, as it doesn't really hit my opponent too hard. Realistically, all it does is improve some of his ace-3, which I also have, and it improves his pocket pairs versus my 5-4 combo. All of my straights and sets are still going to be doing pretty well on this card overall. Ultimately, I'm really just trying not to see some of those Broadway cards that my opponent could have decided to continue with on the flop. My opponent checks, and I think I want to be going large here, as I do have that nut advantage as well as the nut potential with my hand, and I think again my hand really values denial here. Not quite as much as it did on the flop, as I fold out a lot of those overcards at this point. But I do think I want to apply pressure on all of those ace-high hands, even though I'm still ahead. I also start to fold out some of the middling pocket pairs, probably not something like 6s or 7s that have a straight draw, but something like 8s, 9s, 10s start to get a little bit uncomfortable. So my hand kind of acts as a hybrid overall. My opponent thinks for a little bit, and he elects to make the call. At this point, I think I've shedded most of his ace-x combos, and I think he primarily has hands like those pocket pairs that decide to be a little bit sticky, as well as some of the stronger pocket pairs that are still ahead of a lot of my bluffs and some of my pocket pairs that I could be betting here for value. The river is the 7 of diamonds. Really good card for my range overall. I still have hands like pocket 7s, pocket 6s, which have now made a straight. I do have some hands like 6-5 that have made a straight. So overall, I have a lot of straights. I have a lot of 3x combos. I have a lot of full houses, all of which my opponent has, but at a very, very low frequency. My opponent checks, and I think that I want to just go really massive here. Just really represent all of those nut hands that my opponent really can't have. Probably go a little bit too big, but I think it's fine to really size up here. And I bet 1100 into this pot of 620. My opponent thinks for a little bit and makes the fold. I think it's really hard for my opponent to continue here with a lot of his overpairs. If I'm in his shoes, I'm pretty disgusted with even a hand as strong as aces here. The next hand, we open up a little bit wide versus a limp from middle position. I open up King 3 of clubs from the hijack to $50. It folds around to the small blind, which is the lawyer from the last hand, and he 3-bets it to $200. In the moment, I thought that this player was probably 3-betting a little bit wider from the small blind. I think that my hand really can't continue here, but I think that it can probably do a small frequency of 4-betting as it's a weaker suited King X. Pretty similar to the ace 3, ace 4, ace 5 style of hands. Obviously not quite as good as the top pair potential isn't as strong, as well as not having the straight draw, but I'm in position. I'm feeling a little gambly, so I bump it up to $500. The lawyer thinks for a little bit and he makes the call. We go heads up to the flop in this 1K pot. The flop is the King of Diamonds, 6 of clubs, 4 of hearts, giving me top pair weak kicker. Overall, this is a board that I'm just going to be range betting. It doesn't really matter what I have at this point. We're going to be using a small size, so when the lawyer checks, I continue for 255, about a quarter pot. He thinks for a little bit and he makes the call. Overall, I think it's fine to be betting with this hand. I have a little bit of backdoor equity with the straight draw and the flush draws, as well as my top pair is going to be up against a lot of weaker pairs like jacks through sevens, a little bit of ace 6, ace 4. I also get called by hands like ace queen, queen jack with backdoor flush draws. The turn is the queen of spades. Overall, a pretty good card for my range. I think typically my range is going to be barreling a high frequency here. I really only expect my opponent to have a couple of calls on the flop with their queen X hands. Like I said, the ace queen, the king queen with the backdoors. Primarily, their range is going to consist of weaker pocket pairs. My opponent checks and I decide to go for thin value against some of those weaker pocket pairs with the intention of just checking back pretty much every river. I also would like to get a little bit of value if my opponent does have some of those queen X combos. I'm obviously value owning myself a little bit versus king X combos, but I really only expect king X suited combos, and I'm blocking a lot of the king X combos with the king of clubs, with the king of diamonds and the queen of spades out there. I think there's just not too many king X combos, as I really only expect to see king queen through king 10 suited. My opponent tanks for a little while, and ultimately he does fold, and he shows pocket jacks, so tried to go for a little bit of thin value. Unfortunately, the queen made it much less likely for him to call, but hey, we decided to 4-bet a pretty trashy hand and we made a lot from it, so pretty happy with the result. We once again face off against Salim. This one ends up being a pretty interesting hand. He opens from middle position to $30. A stronger reg calls in the cutoff, and I look down at 7-6 offsuit in the big blind. I believe we were playing the Nick game at the time, so that I probably made this call at a higher frequency. Typically, this is going to be a hand that I'm mostly folding, but I think it's fine to call at a small frequency. We go 3 ways to the flop with the pot at $95, and the flop is the 8 of clubs, 5 of clubs, 2 of clubs. Pretty interesting flop for me. I flop the open ender with the weak flush draw. I check, and Salim decides to continue here for $50, about half pot. The cutoff player quickly folds, and I think that Salim is going to be stabbing here quite frequently, and because of that, I think that my hand makes a pretty good check raise. I do have the open ender and the flush draw. Obviously, I'm not thrilled if a club comes out, but I'm ahead of a lot of his stronger pocket pair hands, his hands like ace 8, 9-8, as well as his sets if I do hit the flush. And with 7 high, I'm pretty happy if we get a fold here as well. I raise to $200. He tanks for a little while, and to my horror, he decides to 3-bet to $650, and my equity quickly shrivels up. Pretty interesting spot. I think that he does have a lot of overpairs here. He's going to have a lot of single club hands. Some of those will be with the overpairs, but I expect a lot of ace of clubs, king of clubs to make this play. He also has sets, so hands like 8s, 5s, and possibly deuces if he's opening them from middle position. I wouldn't expect too many 2-pair combos from this position, so primarily it's just going to be overpairs, made flushes, and strong flush draws. Against that range, I'm obviously doing pretty poorly against the very strong made flushes, as well as the hands like ace-ace with the ace of clubs, but even against that, I still have my open-ender. If he does have a stronger flush draw, I still have a lot of equity as my pairs are often out. I'm blocking his flush from coming in, and I have the straight draw as well. Ultimately, I think it's kind of thin, but I do make the call, and we end up going heads up to the turn with the pot at 1400. The turn is the 9 of spades, giving me the nut straight. Probably the best turn in the entire deck. Some of the weaker straight cards are a little bit more connected on the board. I don't think at this point I really want to see a club too badly, but our equity has now rocketed way ahead of all of his sets and his overpairs. We check and he decides to continue pretty large here, betting 1200. At this point, I'm really not folding. I've hit my straight. The stack to pot ratio is pretty small. If he has a made flush, then he's going to get the rest of my chips either way, I think. I think ultimately the best move here is to shove all in and really get value from all of his overpairs, especially the ones with the club and all of his sets. He also probably just has to call off some of his 8 of clubs combos as he's getting a pretty good price with the pot this large and my shove only being $2,605. Essentially a click back. He thinks for a little bit and makes the call, and we go to the river with me all in this $6,600 pot. The river is a blank, the jack of spades. I show him my straight. He says good hand and mucks, and we scoop this massive pot to start the session. In this hand, Salim opens up to $30 from middle position, and we see a passive regular flat the hijack. I look down at King Jack offsuit in the cutoff. I think this is a pretty good squeeze opportunity. My hand is pretty strong overall, and I'm facing a relatively wide open, as well as a weaker range, which is just calling pre-flop. I 3-bet to $120. Unfortunately, both Salim and the passive reg make the call. When they continue here, I think their range consists of primarily suited broadways with some of the king-queen in there possibly, as well as mostly pocket pairs and a few suited connectors, as well as some ace-x suited hands. We go 3 ways to the flop with the pot at $375. The flop is the king of spades, 3 of diamonds, 2 of spades. An amazing flop for me. Overall, I would expect my opponents to primarily have pocket pairs that can continue here. They're going to have some flush draws and some king X as well. I wouldn't expect too many pocket threes or pocket deuces, although I do think it's possible. It checks to me, and I'm going to go a pretty small sizing here in general, trying to get value from a lot of those pocket pairs. I think once I start to bloat the pot too much, I end up being against stronger king X combos primarily. When we are multi-way, both my opponents have to tighten up a little bit and share the defense frequency, so a small size makes a lot of sense. Salim makes the call, and the passive reg decides to make it $600. Pretty interesting raise from him. He's relatively tight, not super active, so his raise is pretty strong here. He definitely could be attacking the smaller sizing here though. I'm not sure how often he would be raising some of his stronger king X combos, as I do have hands like aces and ace kings at a much higher frequency than him. I guess it's possible that he has a hand like ace king, but I would expect him to primarily be 3-betting at pre-flop and possibly 4-betting versus my 3-bet. Both Salim and I are pretty active. He might be raising king queen here as well, or king jack, but I don't find it super likely. Obviously, I'm dead versus something like pocket threes or pocket twos that took this line, calling preflop and then getting a relatively good price multi-way preflop and deciding to overcall. But overall, I think his hands are primarily going to be hands like ace-x of spades, especially if he has something like 6-5 of spades, ace-5 of spades, ace-4 of spades, which gives him a combo draw here. There's a slight chance he's also raising something like the ace-4 of diamonds, something like that, like a weaker gut shot and trying to attack my smaller sizing. I think for a little bit, and ultimately I do make the call. Salim makes the fold, and we go heads up to the turn with the pot at $1,700. The turn is the 10 of spades. Not the card I'm really looking for, as primarily the hands I am beating are those flush draw combos. Thankfully, my opponent decides to check. I think I have a pretty clear check back. I'm really not beating too much. King 10 also gets there. So realistically, I'm beating like a missed straight draw or some combo that decided to get out of line, which I don't really expect from this opponent at a high frequency. The river is the 6 of hearts. Really doesn't change much, and my opponent decides to bet very, very small here and bets $400 into this $1,700 pot. I think I was folding versus any large sizing. Kind of a weird spot versus this size. I really don't beat too much. If my opponent has something like ace king, king queen, they definitely could be using this size. I'm obviously getting destroyed by all of his flushes, his pocket threes, his pocket deuces. Even 5-4 got there. So I can't really think of too many hands that I beat. Ultimately, I do decide to make the call though, as I'm getting a stellar price here. I don't expect my opponent to have too many flushes that take this line where they check the turn and bet small on river, so that does reduce some of his value. But I really wasn't sure at the time and ultimately just made my decision on his sizing. Thankfully, he flips over King of Hearts, Jack of Clubs to have the same top pair combo as I do. So he was just going for very thin value on the flop. Once he got the call and he saw the flush coming on the turn, his hand strength definitely reduced. So it makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure if I'm betting too much with his hand on the river, but maybe it's fine with the smaller sizing, trying to get called by some of my pocket pairs that contain a spade. I don't know how much of those I continue with on the turn multi-way though. Ultimately, a pretty good result as we chop up some of Salim's money. In this hand, we have an early position limp, and the Dock of Felt opens it up to 35. A unknown player in the small blind decides to call, and I look down at 4-3 of spades in the big blind, and I think I have a pretty reasonable call here. I'm essentially closing the action with the caveat that I expect the initial limper to always make the call, which he does, and we go 4 ways to the flop with the pot at $140. The flop is the 6 of hearts, 6 of spades, 3 of hearts. I'm primarily going to be checking here. I think this specific board, these like low connected, especially paired boards, are going to favor the big blinds range. So I think it's totally reasonable to donk bet. But I primarily am playing a checking strategy, and I do that here. It checks around to the initial raiser, and he decides to bet 60 into 140. I think I can fold some 3x here with a player behind, but I'm pretty much always going to be continuing my 3x that does have these backdoors. So having the backdoor straight and the backdoor flush, I think makes this a mandatory call, as I can pick up additional equity on the turn. I make the call, and the initial limper makes the call. I expect the initial raiser to be a little bit stronger when he does bet into a field of 3 players. I think he has a lot of overpairs here. He has a lot of flush draws here. I don't know how often he's going to be just betting 2 overcards, but I don't think it's unreasonable for him to bet some of his stronger overcards that can make top pair here. He's also going to have some hands that do have reasonable backdoors, so something like 8-7 of spades or ace-7 of spades, something like that that can pick up a straight or a flush draw, in addition to having an overcard. When the limper calls, I expect him to have heart draws and a lot of pairs here. I can't think of too many other draws that he's realistically going to have here. He could have a hand like ace-3, but for the most part, I expect something like pocket 5s, pocket 7s, or a flush draw. The turn is the ace of hearts, and it checks around. I think this is a pretty bad card for the early position raiser overall. Obviously, he could have some flushes here, but I think myself and the limper have a ton of flushes here, and the initial raiser has a lot of overpairs that are not excited to see the ace, which is one of the few overcards depending on his pocket pair, as well as the flush draw coming in against 2 players. So I do expect this to check around at a decent frequency. We go to the river, which is the 5 of clubs. Overall, I think that this board is going to be massively favorable for my position. I still have all of the 6x combos here. I have a ton of flushes here. Definitely the early position limper can have some flushes, but I think there's going to be very few of them, especially when the ace of hearts comes. It's realistically only 2 Broadway cards, maybe some suited connectors, but me being in the big blind, I have a wide range of different flushes. I'm going to have full houses here that my opponents can't have. I'm going to have straights that my opponents can't have. So I think overall, I probably want to be turning my hand into a bluff. I don't expect my pair of threes to be good against two players. Like I said, the early position player is going to have a lot of the weaker pocket pairs, and the initial raiser is going to have a lot of pocket pairs under the ace. So I think I really want to just apply a lot of pressure on hands like even kings, queens, jacks that do not have a heart. I do think with the massive nut advantage that my range has here, I do want to use pretty large sizes. So ultimately, I decide that overbet is the best size here, and I bet $425 into two players. The early position limper pretty quickly folds, and the Dock of Felt folds quickly after that. And so we get this bluff through, and we scoop this small but still meaningful pot. In this hand, I open up the King of Clubs, 10 of Diamonds from the cutoff to $30, and the lawyer in the big blind defends. We go heads up to the flop, which is the Queen of Diamonds, Jack of Diamonds, 9 of Diamonds, giving me the nut straight with the open-ended straight flush redraw. So definitely the flop I'm looking for when I open up King 10 here. My opponent checks. I think generally on these flush draw boards, I'm going to be using small sizes. I definitely think I can mix in some larger sizes. I think on this specific board, it's pretty connected, and I do expect my opponent to continue with a good portion of their range. So I decide to size up a little bit here and bet $45. My opponent thinks for a little bit and makes the call. I expect my opponent to primarily be raising their made flushes here. I don't expect my opponent to have a hand like pocket queens, pocket jacks, or pocket nines. So for the most part, my opponent, when they call here, is going to have possibly a two pair hand, although that might raise as well, but primarily going to have a good draw, so a single ace or king of diamonds, or something like a pair, which usually includes a draw. So something like king queen with the king of diamonds, queen 10, jack 10, something like that. They probably are continuing with hands as weak as something like 9-8 here. I don't know if they're continuing all the time versus a larger size with a weaker 9x combo, although I do expect them to also be continuing with pocket pairs that include a diamond. The turn is the 8 of clubs, which is a very interesting card. Obviously, it doesn't really change my hand, but now all of my opponent's 10x make a straight. Like I said, I do expect a lot of hands like queen 10, jack 10, 9, 10. I think they could definitely have a two pair combo here. They could possibly have a hand like pocket eights. I think that generally on this type of turn card where there's a four liner to a straight, I want to be maximizing my EV with the nut straight, especially with the 10 of diamonds blocker here. And I decide to go pretty large. I do think that my opponent is going to obviously continue with all of their straights here. But I think if they have a two pair combo, a pair plus a flush draw, something like that, I think it's still a mandatory continue. And if they do have something like king 10 that decided not to raise flop, I'm free rolling against that. I'm really only in trouble if they specifically do have a made flush here, but there's not too many made flushes that don't raise flop, as well as if they do have a made flush and it's a weaker flush, I do have outs to that. They make the call, and we go to the river, which is the 6 of clubs. Doesn't really change much. My opponent has a straight here. They could still possibly have a two pair hand or something like king queen with the king of diamonds. I think I do want to be sizing up here. I think a lot of my missed flush draws, if I had like a single ace of diamonds, probably wants to bet large here. I also want to maximize my value versus those 10x combos. So I decide to continue here for $350. My opponent tanks for quite a while, and ultimately they do make the call. I show the king 10 for the nut straight, and they flip over pocket kings with the king of diamonds. So I'm pretty surprised to see that hand. Unfortunately for my opponent, they get punished for not 3-betting pre-flop. I think it's a pretty reasonable hand to bluff catch with. He's blocking the nut straight combos, and he's blocking a lot of my made flushes. I don't think that I'm betting sets or two pair here on the river, so I'm pretty polarized to something like king 10 or a made flush. So I think if he is going to make a call, he probably wants to be blocking both of those type of value hands. So I think it's a good call by him. Unfortunately, I do have the goods this time, and I scooped this $1,100 pot. In this straddle pot, we see an early position limp, and a tighter reg opens it up to $80 in the +2 position. I decide to flat pocket fives in the +3 position. I really don't expect to get 3-bet too often, and I expect the limper to almost always call after I call. So I'm getting pretty good odds to set mine here. If players call behind me, I'm getting slightly better odds. If players behind do not call me, then I get to play in position. So I think either way, this is a pretty profitable call. The limper does continue, and we go 3 ways to the flop with the pot at $275. The flop is the 4 of clubs, 8 of diamonds, 6 of diamonds. It checks to me, and I think that my hand makes a pretty reasonable bet here. I have a gut shot, backdoor flush draw. I prevent some of the diamonds from coming in if my opponents do have diamond draws, and my specific hand really gains a lot of value from denying equity from overcards. I typically expect the initial opener here to be continuing with all of their overpairs, or at least at a very high frequency. So I expect folds from him for the most part. Maybe he continues with something like ace king with a diamond. I'm not really sure what the passive reg has here when he limp calls, but I do expect him to connect with this board a decent amount unless he just has a Broadway, which I'm fine folding out. If he connects with this board, he's gonna occasionally have some sets, but I think I'll hear from those early on and I can play my hand accordingly. He does make the call, so I expect him to have something like 9-8, 8-7, 6-5, somewhere in that region, which connects with this board a little bit. He could also have a flush draw, and we see the initial opener fold, which is pretty much what we expected to get out of this bet if we don't get 2 folds. We go heads up to the turn, and the turn is the jack of hearts. Really doesn't change much for my opponent's range unless he has exactly the jack of diamonds with his flush draw. When it checks to me, I think I want to continue here for a relatively large size. I have a lot of the jack of diamonds combos here, as well as all of the sets that I don't think he has too much of, as I would have expected him to primarily be raising them on the flop. So I continue here for 470. He thinks for a little bit and makes the call. At this point, I think all of his pair plus straight draw, pair plus flush draw is going to continue. And as stated before, he could have the jack of diamonds still at a low frequency. The river is the 2 of spades, essentially just a complete blank here. My opponent checks, and I think that I generally want to be just using a massive sizing here. Obviously, I'm beating some of his flush draws, but I think I really want to just apply a lot of pressure on all of the 1-pair hands, which is pretty much his entire range. I think his 8x is going to have a lot of trouble calling a large bet, as well as all of the weaker pairs. And even the jack x, if he has the jack of diamonds, is kind of an awkward call, as what do I get here with when he has 2 diamonds, as well as I have all of the sets in my range. As stated, I go large. I bet $1,250 into this $1,500 pot. He tanks for a little bit, and ultimately he does make the fold. So I think this is just a very specific spot where I have such a massive range and nut advantage that I want to barrel a very high frequency, and I just want to be barreling large. And thankfully it works out very well this time. Had a very solid session overall. Helps when my biggest bluffs got through and I hit the straights on some of those monotone boards. The 7-6 offsuit binking the nut straight on the turn versus what had to be a pretty strong range, and hitting the king 10 straight on the flop versus the overpair and flush draw. So definitely ran well this session, and hopefully that continues. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'll see you again shortly. Thanks. Bye.